In 605 BCE, the Middle East stood at a turning point. The once mighty Assyrian Empire had crumbled, leaving a power vacuum stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. Egypt, under Pharaoh Necho II, moved north to seize former Assyrian lands, while a rising Babylonian force, led by young Crown Prince Nebuchadnezzar, prepared to challenge them. Carchemish, a strategic city on the Euphrates, became the crossroads of empire, trade, and war. Merchants, soldiers, and emissaries filled its streets, sensing the tension of imminent conflict. What would happen here would shape centuries to come, redrawing maps, trade routes, and royal destinies across the Fertile Crescent. Pharaoh Necho II had already marched through Palestine, crushing resistance at Megiddo and establishing Egyptian garrisons in former Assyrian territories. His army was vast: chariots, Libyan infantry, Nubian archers, and hired Greek mercenaries. Each battalion carried Egypt's ambitions: control over the Fertile Crescent and its lucrative caravan routes linking Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean. Necho believed Babylon, still young, could be stopped before it rose too high. Yet his spies brought troubling reports. Nebuchadnezzar's army was larger than expected, disciplined and battle-hardened from campaigns against the remnants of Assyria. Necho pushed onward toward Carchemish, confident but wary, setting the stage for a decisive confrontation. Across the Euphrates, Nebuchadnezzar prepared his army with precision. As crown prince and general, he had reorganized Babylon's forces: infantry phalanxes with bronze shields, swift chariot divisions, and disciplined cavalry trained in Assyrian siege tactics. Supply wagons moved alongside, filled with grain, arrows, and spears. This was not merely a military campaign. It was a bid for supremacy over trade and tribute. Nebuchadnezzar personally addressed his soldiers, invoking Babylon's gods and promising riches from Egypt's retreat. Young but determined, he knew his reputation, and Babylon's future hung on this moment. The Euphrates shimmered like a steel blade, separating two worlds about to collide. Carchemish's geography favored defense, a fortified city on high ground, commanding the Euphrates crossing. Whoever held it controlled the gateway between Mesopotamia and Syria. Egyptian engineers reinforced the walls, dug ditches, and placed archers on towers. Babylonian scouts mapped every terrain feature: ravines, marshes, and the riverbanks. Trade caravans still arrived, carrying tin, textiles, and spices. But their passage was taxed heavily by soldiers who now camped where merchants once bargained. The market square's voices grew hushed as rumors spread of an impending siege. Carchemish was no longer a thriving hub. It had become the anvil on which empires would clash. As darkness fell, both camps prepared. Egyptian priests lit incense before their gods, invoking Horus and Amun for victory. Babylonian astrologers studied the stars, seeking omens of triumph. Soldiers sharpened blades and whispered prayers, while officers issued last orders. The Euphrates reflected flickering torches like molten gold, separating two armies filled with anticipation and dread. Merchants and civilians fled the city, clutching their wares. Nebuchadnezzar inspected the front lines quietly, his face hard with resolve. Across the water, Pharaoh Necho remained confident, recalling Egypt's ancient victories. Yet both leaders knew the dawn would decide not only their own fates, but the future of the region. At dawn, horns blared and drums thundered. Babylonian infantry advanced in dense ranks, bronze shields interlocked, spears gleaming. Egyptian chariots thundered forward, their wheels slicing through soft earth as archers loosed volleys into the advancing lines. The first clash sent shockwaves of sound and splintering wood across the plain. Dust rose, obscuring banners as commanders shouted orders above the roar. Cavalry units tried to flank Babylon's front, but Nebuchadnezzar's reserves countered swiftly. Within minutes, the battlefield became a swirling storm of bodies, steel, and hooves. This was no skirmish. This was the decisive blow both powers had prepared for months. Nebuchadnezzar's infantry formed a spear wall, bracing against the Egyptian chariots' repeated charges. Spearmen locked shields and thrust upward, impaling charging horses or overturning chariots. Behind them, archers launched a relentless rain of arrows, targeting Egyptian drivers and horses alike. The discipline of Babylon's army, trained in the Assyrian style, proved decisive. Egyptians, accustomed to open-field victories, found themselves frustrated, their formations splintering under the unyielding spear wall. Dust and blood mixed underfoot as Babylon pressed forward. Necho too signaled his second wave, but already the momentum had shifted. This new Babylonian military machine was unlike anything Egypt had faced before. Pharaoh Necho, refusing to retreat, unleashed his elite Nubian archers and Libyan infantry. Dark arrows streaked across the battlefield, cutting down Babylonian officers and sowing confusion. Heavy infantry surged forward with axes and curved swords, hacking at shields. For a moment, the tide turned. Babylonian ranks buckled under the onslaught. Trumpets blared as Nebuchadnezzar galloped along the lines, rallying his troops and signaling his cavalry to countercharge. Horses crashed into Egyptians from the flank, scattering archers and sowing panic. This was leadership in motion, Nebuchadnezzar risking himself to steady the army, while Necho remained atop his chariot directing from afar. The battle spilled toward the Euphrates. Soldiers fought knee-deep in mud and blood, their screams echoing over crashing waters. Babylonian engineers unleashed a hidden tactic. Flaming pitch poured into the river, setting enemy boats ablaze and blocking Egyptian retreat. Chariots stuck in marshy ground became easy prey for spear-wielding infantry. By midday, the battlefield resembled a slaughterhouse, corpses floating downstream. Yet Necho's guards still formed a defensive ring around him, refusing to break. Trade barges moored along the banks burned, their cargo of tin, cedar, and textiles lost forever, symbolizing the economic stakes behind this war as much as the political ones. By afternoon, Nebuchadnezzar targeted the Egyptian left flank with a concentrated assault. Babylonian chariots charged alongside infantry, breaking through weakened lines. Trumpets signaled a pincer movement, cutting off Egyptian supply wagons. Camels laden with grain and silver were seized, crippling Egyptian logistics. Mercenaries began deserting, sensing defeat. Nebuchadnezzar seized the moment, directing archers to rain arrows on the retreating wing, turning withdrawal into massacre. Pharaoh Necho tried to stabilize his army, but too much ground had been lost. The Egyptian dream of controlling the Fertile Crescent began unraveling, piece by piece, under the weight of Babylonian strategy and discipline. Nebuchadnezzar, clad in bronze armor, led from the front, rallying his men with visible courage. Across the field, Necho's second stood high on his war chariot, commanding with sweeping gestures. The two leaders, though never meeting blade to blade, fought a duel of strategy and morale. Nebuchadnezzar's ability to adapt mid-battle, shifting troops, exploiting terrain, gave him the edge. Egyptian command faltered as communication lines collapsed. This contrast between young, aggressive leadership and old imperial tradition became clear to all observers. Diplomats and spies watching from the city's walls realized history was tilting. The birth of a new superpower was unfolding before their eyes. As the sun dipped, Egypt's army broke. Panic spread like wildfire. Soldiers cast down weapons and fled toward the Euphrates crossings. Babylonian cavalry pursued relentlessly, cutting down stragglers. The once proud Egyptian chariots lay smashed, their horses dying in the mud. Necho escaped with a small escort, abandoning vast stores of weapons, gold, and provisions. Babylon had not just won a battle, but annihilated an army. The Euphrates carried Egyptian bodies downstream like grim offerings to the gods. This victory gave Nebuchadnezzar unchallenged control over Syria and the lucrative caravan routes, instantly transforming Babylon from a rising power into the region's superpower. After the rout, Babylonian forces entered Carchemish as victors. Gates swung open without resistance. Egyptian garrisons surrendered or fled. Markets once filled with Egyptian merchants now brimmed with Babylonian banners. Nebuchadnezzar spared the city's inhabitants, but imposed heavy tribute, taking control of warehouses stocked with tin, textiles, and exotic goods. Babylonian scribes immediately began cataloging taxes and trade contracts. Carchemish became a Babylonian stronghold overnight, controlling the flow of caravans from Anatolia to Mesopotamia. This was conquest with an economic brain behind it. War used to seize and manage wealth, not just territory. Babylon's empire now had a commercial heart. Nebuchadnezzar's victory yielded immense spoils. Egypt's gold, silver, and captured weapons filled Babylonian wagons. Horses and camels, vital for trade and transport, were seized, as were maps and ledgers detailing Egyptian trade networks. Babylonian craftsmen and merchants followed the army, setting up stalls and forging new trade agreements under royal protection. Control of the Fertile Crescent meant dominance over caravan tolls and river shipping. This wasn't mere plunder, it was the foundation of a sustained economic empire. Nebuchadnezzar's reputation soared, and Babylon's treasury overflowed, funding future building projects and military campaigns. The city of Babylon prepared to enter a golden age. Far to the south, Pharaoh Necho returned to Egypt humiliated. His once proud army was shattered, his dreams of controlling Mesopotamian trade routes crushed. News of the defeat spread quickly, undermining his authority and emboldening rivals. Egypt would remain a powerful kingdom, but no longer the dominant force of the Near East. In temples along the Nile, priests offered sacrifices to appease the gods, but the loss could not be undone. The Battle of Carchemish had shifted the balance of power irrevocably. Babylon's shadow now stretched from the Persian Gulf to the borders of Egypt itself, signaling the dawn of a new imperial age. With Babylon in control of Carchemish, the ancient trade arteries of the Fertile Crescent reopened under new management. Caravans carrying lapis from Afghanistan, cedar from Lebanon, and tin from Anatolia now paid tribute to Babylonian officials. River tolls and tariffs enriched the royal treasury, funding Nebuchadnezzar's ambitious projects. Merchants found safer passage under Babylonian patrols, while scribes standardized contracts and weights. The Euphrates became the highway of an empire, linking far-flung provinces to the imperial center. This shift from Egyptian to Babylonian oversight marked not only a political but an economic revolution, one rooted in the blood-soaked soil of Carchemish. In Babylon itself, celebrations erupted, temples offered sacrifices, and artisans carved steles recounting the victory at Carchemish. Nebuchadnezzar, though still crown prince, was hailed as a living embodiment of Marduk's power. His father, King Nabopolassar, saw in this triumph the realization of decades of struggle against Assyria and Egypt. Babylonian scholars and priests understood its implications: control of resources, manpower, and strategic corridors. This was the first step toward a truly imperial Babylon. Citizens envisioned not only wealth but also security. Their city transformed into the heart of a vast and stable empire spanning deserts, rivers, and mountain passes. The Battle of Carchemish revealed two styles of leadership. Pharaoh Necho represented the old world, centralized power, reliance on tradition, and distant command. Nebuchadnezzar embodied innovation, flexible tactics, logistical foresight, and direct engagement with troops. Future generations studied this contrast as a case of how leadership can determine imperial fate. Merchants and generals alike learned that war and trade were inseparable, and that discipline, supply chains, and local alliances often outweighed raw numbers. This fusion of military might with economic planning set a precedent for later empires from Persia to Rome. Carchemish thus became a timeless lesson, not just a battlefield. News of the Babylonian victory raced across the ancient world. In Jerusalem, Tyre, and Anatolia, kings and city-states recalculated their alliances. Ambassadors rushed to Babylon offering tribute, while spies reported home on the empire's growing reach. Traders adjusted their routes, eager to profit under the new order. The collapse of Egyptian power in the north freed Babylon to project influence westward, eventually setting the stage for its encounters with the kingdoms of Judah and beyond. Carchemish thus became more than a battle. It was a signal flare announcing a new hegemon. The Fertile Crescent, long contested, now had a master. The Battle of Carchemish was more than a clash of armies. It was the birth of a superpower. Babylon emerged with territory, wealth, and prestige unmatched since Assyria's height. Nebuchadnezzar would go on to rule as king, building the Hanging Gardens and reshaping the ancient Near East. Egypt never regained its northern ambitions, while smaller states adjusted to Babylonian dominance. Trade flourished under imperial stability, yet so too did tribute demands and military conscription. The echoes of Carchemish would resonate for centuries, shaping biblical history and imperial ambitions alike. From the blood on its fields sprang the order of a new age,